It's time to slip, slide, swerve, skid, and sigh on this week's episode of Wham Bam Dashcam. Every video you're about to see was sent to us directly, and you'll get the full story behind each one. Enjoy! Hunter was headed to work one morning while it was both raining and snowing. He admits he should have been driving below the speed limit of 55 miles per hour given the conditions, but he was late on his way to work. As he crested a hill, he saw what looked like headlights in the distance. Only too late did he realize they were actually reverse lights in his lane. And when he swerved to miss the pickup truck, he ran right into its plow. Hunter's Chevy Cruze slid into the snowplow even though he was standing on the brake pedal. The impact totaled his Cruze and destroyed the plow attachment. Hunter called 911 and the road conditions delayed first responders for 15 minutes. Neither of them requested medical attention, but that ended up being a mistake as Hunter had bruised ribs and tinnitus from the collision. Insurance investigators found the pickup driver at fault, and his insurance provider gave Hunter enough money to replace his Chevy Cruze with a used 2021 Nissan Altima a week later. I think we can learn two lessons from this story. Slow down when the road is slick, and get checked out by paramedics even if you feel fine in the moment. Emmanuel was on his way home when he encountered a traffic light that was stuck. When an oncoming driver ran the light without checking for cross traffic, she was T-boned by a Suzuki before sliding into Emmanuel's Maple 30X. Emmanuel's new car had fewer than 3,000 miles on it. Thankfully, only the rear door was damaged, and the key components, including the traction battery, were unaffected. Still, fixing it took 6 months, since the car model is new and sourcing a replacement door was challenging. The new door cost $1,000 US. It took help from his wife Maine and his daughter Alejandra to convince the insurance company to pay for a new door after the shop used so much putty to fix the original door that it put holes in the paint. His son Ian told us they took on the roles of Karen and Little Karen in their dealings with the insurance company, and that sometimes we all need a couple of Karens on our side. Tamir was headed home from work in his 3-day-old Kia Seltos. As he approached a roundabout, he noticed a large group of teenagers blocking the road, and he knew something bad was about to happen. Even though he tried to reverse to safety, the teenagers chased after him. He decided to floor the accelerator as they pelted his new car with eggs and water balloons. Thankfully, he was able to get away. Tamir stopped and called the police, assuming his car was damaged. Thankfully, when he got out to check for damage, all he found was eggshells. The police called him back 25 minutes later to tell him they'd arrested 4 suspects. Tamir decided not to make a criminal complaint since he couldn't find any damage to his car. Check out the collision Zach witnessed while driving his Mustang GT. An oncoming driver turned across traffic and was T-boned by another SUV. Both drivers were transported to the hospital with injuries, as one was an elderly man and the other wasn't wearing his seatbelt. Zach had only just begun to render aid when firefighters arrived. Police also responded, and Zach gave them a statement and a copy of his dashcam video before leaving. Moritz was on his way to visit family and was following behind a car and a semi-truck. As they all made their way through a roundabout, one of the truck's tires suddenly exploded. Even from inside his car, Moritz told us the tire explosion was extremely loud. Thankfully, there was no damage and there were no injuries. The trucker told him he'd already called roadside assistance, so Moritz continued on his way. Ashok was passing traffic on a highway where the speed limit is 55 miles per hour. Out of nowhere, the vehicle in front of him swerved to reveal a car completely stopped in the middle of his lane. Ashok had to swerve into the grass on the shoulder to avoid a collision while also honking his horn. The car's hazard lights were flashing, so we're guessing the driver was having trouble. Even so, always pull off the road if your car begins to have issues. Don't wait for it to stop rolling and end up stuck in the middle of the passing lane like that guy. Hubert was driving his Nissan Xterra when the driver of an SUV pulled out in front of him onto the road. When Hubert honked, the SUV driver hit the brakes and Hubert couldn't avoid running into it.
Are you serious?
Thankfully, Hubert's Xterra suffered only minimal damage and nobody was injured in the collision. The SUV driver was apologetic and his insurance provider offered Hubert $100 to fix his front bumper. Hubert told us he just replaced his front bumper, which cost $2,000 in parts and labor. So he's hoping he can get more from the insurance company. He also told us this happened just 2 months after installing a dash cam. He said, "I highly recommend getting one. They pay for themselves." If you need a dash cam for your vehicle, check the video description for exclusive coupon codes just for our viewers. Peter encountered a driver who wanted to turn left but failed to utilize the center turn lane in order to get out of the way of other traffic. After Peter started honking and shouting at the other driver to use the center turn lane, they stayed right where they were, even gesturing for other drivers to go around them in that same center turn lane. Eventually, the driver of the Ford Fusion turned and Peter was able to continue. We have no idea if they ever realized that they'd done anything wrong. Christopher was driving down a California highway when the driver of a pickup pulling a trailer suddenly started merging into his lane. Christopher honked before passing the pickup, but it sure seems by his gesturing that the other driver thought Christopher was in the wrong even though he hadn't even used his turn signal. He even pointed at the upcoming on-ramp, perhaps meaning that he'd been trying to make room for traffic entering the highway, even though Christopher pointed out that there wasn't any. Christopher just kept driving, but he's surprised that someone driving a company vehicle with logos on the sides would act this way. Watch what happened when Savannah was one light from work. As Savannah entered the intersection on a green light, a driver from the left ran their red light. Savannah didn't see her coming due to another car on Savannah's left that blocked her view. Savannah told us the other driver's insurance was so bad that they wouldn't pay for her car to be towed. Instead, she bent her fender out and tied some wire around her bumper cover so she could drive home. Savannah told us the cops were only able to write the other driver a citation because of her dashcam footage. She said, "Get a dashcam. It will save you a lot of time and money." This submitter was merging onto an interstate highway when he encountered this week's Tesla behaving badly.
That Tesla man can't drive. That Tesla man can't drive.
Our submitter assumed the Tesla driver would slow down to merge behind his Ford Transit van, but instead they just pushed their way in front of him. Thankfully, no contact was made. This submitter noticed someone ahead had blown a tire, so she moved over and turned on her hazard lights. The driver of the GMC SUV next to her wasn't paying attention and swerved toward her when they noticed traffic stopping. Our submitter was able to dodge the sideswipe, but she told us she was so startled she pulled over and let her husband drive the rest of the way home. She asked us to remind people to check their blind spots, especially if they are in a large vehicle, because there might be a little blue Chevy there. Good advice. She also told us they love watching all 3 channels. All 3 channels? Psst, we have 5 channels. Gotta subscribe to them all, as they say. This submitter was headed to In-N-Out when he watched a Honda CR-V driver attempt to make an illegal U-turn in order to get through a red light. Sadly, they failed to check for other traffic. You know, the reason red lights exist.
Honda bumped. Honda bumped. Yeah, Honda bumped.
After Honda bumping another SUV and sending it into a bus stop sign, the Honda driver fled the scene. Our submitter followed and took pictures of the driver, the passengers, and the license plate after they stopped 2 blocks later. He then went back to check on the victims in the other SUV. They were uninjured and called the police. Our submitter gave them the photos and dashcam footage he'd captured, but he never heard anything back from them. In the end, our submitter was able to procure his double-double with no onions. How's that for unnecessary detail? Kyle captured a crazy road rage incident involving the drivers of a Mazda 3 and a Toyota Corolla. We have no idea what prompted this little back and forth, but Kyle followed from a safe distance and watched the drama unfold.
Oh my.
The 2 drivers took turns cutting each other off and blocking one another. Thankfully, no collisions occurred before they presumably went their separate ways, although Kyle's video ended before the uneventful conclusion. Muhammad and his brother Ayman were late on their way to school, and he admits he was in a hurry. Muhammad slammed on his brakes while honking, barely avoiding a collision before continuing on his way to campus. He told us our channel inspired him to buy a dash cam. Thanks, man! Rook was driving down a Colorado highway when he watched a BMW bounce off the median barrier several times before slowing down and stopping. Rook thinks the driver must have fallen asleep, then drove straight into the barrier instead of turning with the highway. He also pointed out the wheel that went flying before careening down the highway. Dean was headed home after picking up his 7-year-old from school. As he drove through an intersection notorious for red light runners, he wasn't surprised at what happened right in front of him. Dean said that if he hadn't stopped for the van, it would have impacted his truck right where his 2-year-old was sitting. All he could do was shake his head and continue on with his day. Hector was taking his sister and her boyfriend to the airport when another driver failed to yield at a roundabout. Thankfully, Hector was able to swerve into the neighboring lane to avoid a collision. Ryan was leaving work and had just backed all the way out of a parking space in a parking garage. Suddenly, a coworker also leaving began to back up directly toward Ryan's Chevy Cobalt.
You've been Honda bumped.
Even though the other driver briefly stopped after Ryan beeped the horn, he then continued backing up until he'd hit Ryan's car even as Ryan continued honking. Afterward, the other driver told Ryan that he thought he'd already left. Thankfully, damage to Ryan's Cobalt was very minimal and he decided not to make an insurance claim. He did take photos of both vehicles and saved the dashcam footage just in case some less obvious damage ever becomes apparent. In the end, he advised his coworker to be more careful in the future before they went their separate ways. Joel sent us this video of typical Aussie country road shenanigans. He noticed a vehicle ahead slow down and stop, then saw a young farmer attempting to round up 2 loose calves running down the side of the road. Joel told us he'd only just replaced his broken dash cam. Remember to grab one for your own car if you haven't already. Maybe one day your video will be featured on Wham Bam Dashcam.
Wham, bam, we got a Patreon, man. Please support the show.